Heidegger commences Being in Time by demonstrating one by one the different ways we humans become aware of our existence, our being. He concludes that we become aware of ourselves by our awareness of our past, present, and future. Therefore, being is time. Heidegger sees men as receiving their existence from the contingency of where they are situated, thrown into the world, and from other beings that they must interact with. The difficulty is in becoming an authentic individual. Guilt and anxiety plague us. We move into an unknown future with no certainty of the correctness of our choices. We feel great anxiety concerning the finitude of death, but this awareness of death enables us to become authentic, to become separate from the conformity of other beings in the world if we choose. We face death alone. No one can accompany us there. We desire meaning, but all we are aware of is meaninglessness, a void. Since we are thrown into the world, Heidegger says we must make choices within a historic, geographic, and cultural background. We cannot rid ourselves of these givens. Heidegger maintains that these fixities give our choices more meaning. Living in time is inseparable from being. We are always moving toward the future, which is death. To refuse to face death creates an inauthentic future. When you refuse death, you refuse a part of yourself. Heidegger maintains you must remember the past, not as disjointed moments, but as a whole that brought you to the present moment. Inauthentic ways of facing past and future involve losing oneself in the society of the conventional. People immerse themselves in social events, competitions, and rivalries. They displace their anxiety with regard to finitude into smaller, shallower concerns. Gossip is a common escape. As it is repeated, it loses more and more connection with reality. By remembering the past of our history, we can understand different ways of being. By remembering our finitude, we can embrace a significant engagement with the world. One may achieve authenticity by living for one's own values resolutely, and not at the dictates of others. The sense of anxiety and meaninglessness that Heidegger describes is a great dilemma for modern man. We will see it again in Sartre and Camus, who were greatly influenced by Heidegger. Heidegger did not want to be called an existentialist, but his concerns situate him as one of existentialism's most important philosophers. Heidegger was a supporter and member of the Nazi Party in Germany during the Holocaust and World War II. He was an anti-Semite. The late Heidegger began to succumb to mysticism, and he stated that only a God can save us now. Nevertheless, his second philosophy, with all its mysticism and obscurity, is a very deep critique of the effects technology and information technology are having on the obscuring of being, reducing all being to a false state of focusing on the technology itself, rather than the human creativity which produced it. His distasteful persona, however, has nothing to do with the importance of his early philosophy. His contributions to philosophy are monumental, and he influenced many schools other than existentialism, such as structuralism and the deconstructionists. Jean-Paul Sartre. Jean-Paul Sartre, thinker, atheist, activist, and French public intellectual, is the philosopher who most exemplifies existentialism. He studied under Husserl, the phenomenologist, and read and admired Heidegger. Being and Nothingness is his magnum opus, written while he was a young man. Sartre composed the text hurriedly, and the haste is apparent. Some parts are not fully developed, and others are turgid, dense, and hard to understand. Sartre's later attempt to defend and disseminate his philosophy to a wider audience. Existentialism as a Humanism, the lecture 1946, the book publication 1956, is more accessible but still confusing to many readers. This preface will discuss some of the concepts in being and nothingness because the text contains most of Sartre's philosophy. Sartre's text is not easily accessible, unlike his fiction and his plays. Sartre maintained that man does not have a nature, that he comes into the world without one, and this state is designated as existence. It is as he begins to choose that he begins to create himself and become what he is, essence. That is what Sartre means when he uses the two terms. Sartre's existentialism is primarily concerned with choice and making life meaningful by choosing a project, by which Sartre means choosing a goal to move to, short or long term. That the world, or our society, or our physical limitations resist us and our project's completion assures our freedom. We would have no choice in a world that would instantly gratify our desires. Freedom, states Sartre, means to do in a resisting world by means of victory over the world's resistances. Bad faith is an important concept of Sartre's. By attempting to avoid our freedom, we frequently place ourselves in a false position. The realization that we are in a meaningless world where chaos and absurdity exist creates a crisis for us. We become anxious and frightened. One of Sartre's narrators experiences nausea. In order to avoid such negative feelings, we develop bad faith, retreating into scientism and determinism in an attempt to deny that we have any choice. We can also assert that we are not the source of our value system, placing the responsibility on a transcendental other such as God. Sartre has definitions for what he calls being in itself, which is a state of existence like a rock, and being for itself, which is man in a state of reaching for a goal. The concept of God, Sartre maintains, is contradictory. The mythical God is both being in itself and being for itself. That state is the one that we secretly wish to attain. We want to be God, and so we experience failure. Sartre believes that man is a useless passion. Another form of bad faith is to identify oneself with one's profession. Sartre's famous example is of the waiter, who acts so much the waiter that he apparently is nothing else. The waiter does not realize that he has lost himself in his total immersion into his job. Sartre identifies a third form of being in his volume, being for others, which means I exist as an object for others. I am alone in a park. The trees, birds, benches all seem to belong to me. But another person enters. He is the object of my gaze. But now he makes the things in the park objects of his gaze. He looks at me. I am now the object of his gaze, his object. Sartre illustrates being for others with another example. I am eavesdropping at a keyhole, enjoying myself. I hear creaking behind me. Suddenly I feel the other looking at me. I am the object of his judgmental, disapproving gaze. The other's look, his gaze, defines me. Sartre identifies what he considers a fundamental problem between people. We must stop the other from making us into an object, and we know that the other is making the same calculation. Love becomes even more problematical. For as Sartre explains concerning a person who is in love, he wants to be loved by a freedom, but demands that this freedom, as freedom, should no longer be free. We want love given freely, and we want to be objectified as wonderful, the whole world. But then we have no security, for if the lover is free, he can go away, love another, or objectify us as loathsome. Our foundations are no longer in our control. So we want our lover to be free to love us freely, and at the same time we want to possess and control the other. That is why human relations are so difficult, according to Sartre. The concept of facticity is important to Sartre's thinking. The term means the conditions we face, such as our job, our physical limitations, our society, and our location, among other things. But Sartre believes that all these facts are external to us. Our approach can be measured by how we react to the givens, how we interpret them, and the choice we make regarding the facts, to leave them or to stay. Once we make that decision, Sartre asserts that facticity ceases to matter. Sartre does not believe in fatalism. Freedom is difficult. One can only be sure of deciding on something and doing it today and not in the future, because when the future arrives, our action may be different from what we decided earlier. Authenticity, Sartre explains, reveals that the only meaningful project is that of the doing, and not in the arriving at a permanent stopping point. Sartre maintains, my freedom to choose must not be confused with my freedom to obtain. Consequences, even when unpleasant, are not important to Sartre's philosophy. The purpose of a human is to make choices and create values. The only measure of our life is what we do, not what we had the capacity to do. The tenets of existentialism offer man a sense of responsibility. They do not rob him of it, as religion and other institutions would do. When we decide, we have created someone who does what our decision dictated. If we decide to be courageous today and we succeed, we have created a courageous person. We will also have created the value of courage by our decision. Human nature does not exist, says Sartre, and it is our responsibility to create it. This choice and this responsibility defines being human. In closing, when we make such choices, we are defining and choosing what it is to be a human being. That is what Sartre means when he asserts that when you choose for all mankind.